we haven't managed to meet up with our group. So I think that's been a challenge because everyone's just been super busy, or there's been cyclones or something.
Yeah, curveball.
So yes, I think, well, I did get my Baroque cello out, which I haven't done for a number of years. That was something I purchased in COVID, and then it sat in my cupboard. So
Well, why don't you tell everyone about that while I try and just bring Ilse into the call?
so
So
yeah,
talking.
it was something that I just I don't know, I don't know, it was just a whim thing that I've always loved Baroque music, and so I thought, oh, I've done cello for a few years, so I might purchase this thing, but I haven't really had any lessons on how to play it, so it was good to get it out. Terrible weather because it's really hard. It's got gut strings. It's incredibly hard to keep in tune. You have to tune it every 5 minutes almost, like certainly sometimes even through a piece. But and the weather was very bad for that, but I was quite pleased I did manage to keep it in tune long enough to play something. So yeah.
I mean, what kind of gut strings do you use? And actually, does everyone in the Zoom room know what gut strings actually are? Do you want to explain that in terms of how they're different to metal strings?
Yeah, so the A and the D string are gut, which I think is from sheep. I haven't gone into great detail about how they're made because I'm sort of a bit vegetarian, so it's not great.
I actually don't know if they do vegan strings.
I don't think they do, because then
I don't think there is a synthetic
vegan guts.
equivalent.
They'd have to still be synthetic if they were. And then their lower strings are actually gut, and then they're wound. These ones are wound in. I think they originally were wound in silver, the original Baroque ones, but I think these might be wound in.
It's bizarre when you think about it. That's where all the amazing music came from.
I know.
And about my Baroque cello, I use a string maker in Italy, and they're called Aquila, the family.
Yeah, that's what I've got as well.
And I think it's the 5th generation, Kim, that they've been making strings in the family. And he literally kind of stretches it out on the rooftop of their villa in Italy, and they just keep stretching and drying and drying and drying. And also, apparently, they also do apricots as well, because they've got this amazing roof, which is really long and large, and that's what they do. But it's amazing. You can actually get gut in terms of pig and even cat gut. They used to use particularly for violins, because they used to find that. And then also they used to use silk strings. Often the smaller instruments like violins would use silk strings. They experimented with that a lot with cello, but they just often broke because of just the hard pressure of when you're playing and the weight of the bow on the string. But yeah, it's amazing, and it feels totally different, doesn't it, Kim?
What feels totally different. So it feels totally different. The strings are softer. I actually didn't tune it right up because I was just worried about breaking the strings, because they are, I don't know, with the humidity and just if they've sat on your cello for a while, they just become a bit rigid. So yeah, it feels really completely different to play them. And the bow, I've only got a very cheap bow, but it certainly just does feel completely different. And it takes, I mean, even with your regular cello, it takes a while to, but it takes at least half an hour to even start to be able to make it sound like anything, for me anyway.
Yeah, and I think as well, like you have to use a much slower, more curved kind of stretch, more scooped bow stroke generally to kind of really grip the string side to side. And it takes a lot longer to speak clearly, I find. Yeah.
Well, that's been a challenge, but a success too, because I did actually get it out of the cupboard.
Woo! That was great to be able to talk a little bit about the instrument and its design. And of course, it's really changed a lot. And of course, now you can actually buy reproduction Baroque cellos. And I mean, I have an old cello from 1740, which is designed for Baroque and classical, basically late Baroque and classical playing.
Well, mine is a Chinese one from 2016, so yeah.
Yeah, well, there you go. But actually it makes sense, because my old cello really doesn't like this climate at all, and I have hardly played it in the last 10 years because it just doesn't, I mean, even just touring with it is a nightmare because it's so delicate. And the last time I took it down to Sydney, the entire bass bar basically fell off the back and had to be just totally opened up and re-glued. because it's old wood, it's not designed for the bump of the road. And I just think about things like Australian Brandenburg Orchestra, and I know that the majority of those players have reproduction instruments just because they're much more able to cope with the stresses of the road and the climate here. But for example, if you were working in London or Europe, generally speaking, that climate would suit those kind of more obviously early traditional heritage instruments. Mind you, a lot of those instruments tend to be owned by banks and hiding away in beautiful sealed environments. I'm just thinking the Australian String Quartet and the Australian Chamber Orchestra have often the most expensive instruments in our country, and they are all owned by banks. And so the players basically have the opportunity to play them. But I know when they tour, they really get very stressed about it. Insurance is through the roof. I'm just sending her this because even though I reminded lovely Ilse that we were at Queensland time, I don't know if she's actually done that connection because she's in New South Wales. I'm just going to say, are you able to join us? So I'm going to stop talking, go around the Zoom room. Is there a success story for anyone else that they'd like to join in on that conversation? Who else is in the space? Rebecca.
Off the top of my head, I'm a bit like Jean. I can't think fast enough for success.
Oh, okay.
But I'll cheat and use Jean's same challenge. Although I've never played it before, I want to learn Bach suite, so I'm starting with the prelude. So that will be my challenge.
Okay, and do you have all of the suites? And what edition are you using, Rebecca?
Off the top of my head.
I talk about it because it's actually really important. So
it's a blue book.
Yeah, great. That means you're probably doing Bärenreiter and Urtext edition. But actually, I always encourage people to use the original Urtext or Bärenreiter edition because it's actually got the original bowings in. However, Bach cello suites, as you know, there's many, many different editions and also 72 different recordings, all with very different interpretations. So that can get very complex. The landscape of actually working out your own fingerings and particularly bowing choices and articulations are really hard to navigate without a little bit of mentoring or advice from professional artists. And of course, often on particularly either YouTube or free kind of internet sites, you will find a lot of the old kind of 1950s, 1960s editions, which are actually kind of bowed in 8 or bowed in 4. And actually all of those bowings didn't exist for another 150 years after Bach. So those bowings were put in more for convenience, often because those teachers in the kind of 1800s and early 1900s just had no idea how to really play Baroque music. The research wasn't there. So we've done a huge kind of flip, I think, in terms of how we now approach Baroque music. And I always think go back to the original is a great place to start. And you can even get wonderful what we call facsimile editions, where you can actually see the way that the ink was on the page and even the way that the music is written out in handwritten. You can see the spacing between notes. So now in a generic printed edition, everything feels very measured. So semiquaver, semiquaver, but naturally the original facsimile, there's a bit of a gap between the first two semiquavers, meaning pause on the first G, resonate, and keep moving on. So they actually used to use spacing in the actual handwritten to kind of imply how to move within and how to create what they called inégal or inequality.
Is it possible to get copies like that?
Yeah, absolutely. You can get the very original facsimile through a more scholar edition for the Bärenreiter. Bärenreiter and Urtext do a more kind of academic version of that. And I'll just see if I've got it actually. I'll just be able to show you. So it looks exactly the same, Bärenreiter, but you can see straight away.
Yeah.
And so that's like the ink version. I mean, that totally changes the way that you play early music. And of course, paper and ink was really expensive at that time. So they often were much more condensed scores. And what's important to note is in the Bergenreiter edition, there are actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 original facsimile copies from that era with all different bowings in them. So there was no consistent way of doing it, which is the reason why we have so many discussions on it. And even in teaching world, we often find we're very divided in how we like our Bach. But that's a bit like how we like our avocado, isn't it? We all might want it a little bit with salt and pepper, or we might want it on toast. I don't know. I mean, we all are different. I mean, that's the wonderful thing about Baroque music. So I love the fact that you're thinking about jumping into Bach's music. What's important, though, is I often suggest to students to not start with a prelude. That's actually a grade 7 cello A B level piece. And actually, it looks simple, but actually it's very hard to play, particularly the second page, which is more improvised in era. So things like the minuets, the bourrées, the sarabands, and the jigs generally are peppered through from grade 2, 3 upwards and are more suitable for intermediate level. And often when you learn a really good quality minuet or a bourrée, you then start to apply those artistic principles to the prelude. And I think it means you can just bite it down, chunk it down a little bit and kind of learn dance principles that then apply to the prelude. And of course, prelude is very improvised in nature and very florid. It requires a significant amount of analytical skill too, understanding harmonic progressions, understanding harmony, beat emphasis, call and response, and tiered phrasing. So I love the enthusiasm for it. There's nothing wrong with learning it, but you'll find that it will take a while and just, keep chipping away. Yeah. Maybe start asking people for bowings and fingerings. You'll be surprised how different they all are. So how about we see if, I'm just going to see if I've got anything from Ilsa. Nothing yet. It's going well, guys. It's going well. But let's maybe just talk a little bit about why I program Baroque music with folk music. So with the class program, Leonie, because obviously Leonie's zooming in from Tasmania. Hi, Leonie. Hello. You've probably been following that we have a class program, right? It's monthly. And everyone else on the call is either in the intermediate or the advanced stream, okay? And the class program module, February and March and April, we are kind of integrating folk music with Baroque music because I find that those two kind of musical genres work really well together. So maybe let's just talk a little bit about that, why that could be from your perspective as cellists. Why do you think I do that?
Makes sense. It
makes sense because, of course, folk music is very based on meter. The idea of pulse, also what's a strong beat, like in a jig, for example, 1 and a 2 and a 1 and a 2 and a. You're going to really feel that strong emphasis. Just like a Bach prelude, you need to feel your 1, 2, 3, up, beat, 1. So all of those kind of principles are in play. I also find that Baroque music and folk music is often in very simple keys. For example, let's use Jean's and Rebecca's idea of learning the Bach G major suite. G major is very resonant, open strings, and the majority of Baroque music tend to be really simple keys with many, many, many open strings. And that would also connect Kim's experience of playing the Baroque cello, because the Baroque cello didn't have an end pin. Did you know that?
Yeah, you hold it between your
legs. At all. You held it between your legs. And of course, that totally requires a whole different length of kind of fingerboard too. It would have been much shorter up to kind of the A harmonic area. The fingerboard itself was much shorter, but also the balance of the instrument. It means that actually you didn't often sit it on your chest. It wasn't at a 45-degree angle. And it was much more like a rocket ship between your legs, like a gamba, viola da gamba. And often there would have been this kind of pressure point where you could push the actual instrument against the bow. So there's many, many different ways of creating tone. Now we've just got a very static way of playing. But yeah, I think it's interesting when you think a little bit about folk music, also even in terms of the bow hold. So the bow, well, I've got a bow out, pretend this is a bow. We would actually now teach it right at the very end, right near the frog, the heel of the bow. But in the Baroque period, they held it at the balance point. And generally speaking, that's where we often play folk music too. So a lot of the folk fiddlers or Baroque cellists would hold it much higher up. So why do you think holding the bow higher up the stick would also facilitate that, both those styles? Why would that help? Anyone can jump in here. And if you haven't tried it, you should. It's so fun.
Oops. I guess because you're at the balance point, you can really not have to move very much to make the most sound at that point.
And if you think about like a fast jig in a Bach jig, dum bump beat and bump beat, it's all here, kind of in this area, right? Which is just similar to like some of the folk pieces we've been doing in class. You know, this kind of everything's here. So everything in the Baroque period and folk world was very much in the fingers. Everything was kind of relaxed, and a Baroque cello didn't really want to move too much in fast playing. So they kind of actually used to teach. Did you know they used to teach with a book under the arm? Did you know that? So they would have to learn. Let me show you. This is how they would teach the bow all the way through to the 1970s. Book under the arm, play like that. And the reason was, so we got the fingers moving. Has anyone tried that before?
Get the fingers moving.
It's a really good one. Because actually when we have a lot of freedom here, we tend to do all our action up in the upper arm. But in actual fact, by just limiting that, you instantly have to start using this for articulation. But my first cello teacher, because she went through that era, that's what she remembers. Years and years of that, and then going to lessons with a book on the head. Does anyone remember that too? To walk, deportment lessons, I think they called them, didn't they?
Yes. Is that a useful little thing to practice now?
Well, I just think in some ways there's maybe some kind of ideas there, you know, like balance, you know, finding your own kind of center, gravity. But particularly folk and Baroque music, if you haven't experienced playing up here, guys, do that. And actually, that was where I was taught to hold a bow for years. Like in England, when we're learning, we hold it here for at least a year until you can get your bow license to start moving down here, because this is so much more heavy to organize than here. So do you have a Baroque bow, Kim?
I have a very cheap Baroque bow, so you know it is a Baroque bow. So it's a different shape,
and you can actually get Baroque bows really cheaply.
Yeah, it's a cheap. It was a cheap one, $100 or something. So
what could the advantage be if you got a Baroque bow compared to a modern bow? And I mean, let's just explain that. A Baroque bow is much more curved, like this.
It curves sort of the other way.
Yeah, and it kind of like a V shape. So it goes really into a very...
And it's a little bit shorter as well. A little bit, mine is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess it's really the way that you use the bow is more of this sort of almost like a circle.
Yeah.
Like it's a different way of getting the sound, because you really want to get the most sound. You get the most sound right down at the front.
In the heel area.
And then naturally just peters off at the top. So it naturally gives you that sound. So you always want to be doing the down bow on the first, or the beat that you want to accent, or usually the first beat.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Which is why we get the bowing patterns, right? So the down bow is always strong to soft, and the up bow is a natural crescendo, which is why I talk a little bit about that. Even with a modern bow, we need to be still emulating that. And that's also where the folk music feel of ebb and flow come from. Any dance-based music has to have that. So I encourage anyone, if you've got a bit of a budget, you don't need to upgrade your cello, and you certainly don't need to be buying pig gut or cat or silk gut or purchasing instruments from Italy. But what you can do is buy a really cheap reproduction Baroque cello bow if you're going to be learning things like the Bach cello suites. And of course, there's lots of other wonderful early music you can learn. So, for example, Kim, have you learnt the Fantasias by Telemann?
Yes, yes.
They're really beautiful. And I think there's some fantastic early Italian music, which works really well for a pod of, say, duo people or quartets. If some of you are kind of gathering, find the Zuccherini sonatas or concertini, which are baby concertos. And it's like early Vivaldi, basically. And there's so many wonderful kind of repertoire pieces like that. And if you haven't explored IMSLP for early Baroque music, do so, because most of the literature at that time was written for a ground bass or a bass player, normally your teacher or a bass player, meaning it could have been a bassoon, it could have been obviously a double bass, it could have been another cellist, and then of course a solo line. So a lot of the kind of early Vivaldi sonatas, they work really well. Marcello, which is much later on, but all of that will really inform your Baroque playing. And we've also got to remember that the Bach cello suites weren't really taught because they were forgotten about. They were literally not published. And it wasn't until Pablo Casals in the 1920s went into a Spanish bookshop and discovered them. And he thought they were exercises for string crossing. And he was the one who started learning them. And he basically started using them as encores in his concerts. And that's the reason why audience members started going, wow, that's really refreshing. We haven't heard that kind of style of playing before. And he was the one who first started championing it. But he was using an old edition from the 1800s, which had actually got a piano part put to it by Schumann. And so it was totally different to Bach. And I mean, that's what I love about this circuitous route we've finally taken, where we've finally realized that actually this music belonged to Bach, potentially belonged to Bach, because some people still believe, Kim, don't they, that actually it was his wife, Anna Magdalena, who wrote the Bach cello suites. There's some great books on that. Who's read any of those books before? Shall I get my books out on my Bach cello suites? All right.
And you can get the version, like Anna Magdalena wrote a lot of, transcribed a lot of Bach's work anyway. So a lot of his work was in her writing, and you can get a copy, the Anna Magdalena kind of copy of quite a lot of his works.
Yeah, absolutely.
In her handwriting. So it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, so she was basically, because Bach was so prolific, he also, as his part of his job, had to write so much music for church. He was literally just constantly on the pump, writing, all of the liturgy stuff. And so she would often just be behind him, literally just kind of copying. So they had a copy. But this is my favorite books on the Bach cello suites. This is called the Cello Suites, and I will take some pictures of these and share them in the group chat. This is called the Cello Suites by Eric Siblin. It's J.S. Bach, Pablo Casals, and the Search for Baroque Masterpiece. This is a fantastic book to read. It's very descriptive. It's got some wonderful ideas. And what I love about it so much is that it's basically crafted in the same organization as the suites. So, for example, the first chapter is called Prelude. And I think it's just a really clever way of writing what could potentially be quite dry material, historical information, into a great book. This is another good one. I don't know if anyone's read this. Stephen Isserlis is a famous UK-based cellist, and he's the professor of cello at the Royal Academy of Music. And it's simply called The Bach Cello Suites, A Companion. And he loves his writing, Stephen. I find some of it not always helpful for me from a teaching perspective, but I think there's some very detailed analytical ideas. Like he literally goes back to the source, talks about bowings, and gives you many, many different examples of how you could articulate things. And he literally goes through every single movement of the Bach cello suite. So basically all of his teaching encapsulated in a book on the cello suite. Highly, highly useful. And then this and final last one is this one, which is by Martin Jarvis. He's an academic over in Western Australia. And this is the one that kind of caused like shock, horror, and awe in the cello world, because he's literally called it Written by Mrs. Bach, the amazing discovery that shocked the music world, meaning he's found some evidence to suggest that actually it was Anna Magdalena. It wasn't Bach who wrote the music in the first place. So there you go. So get these books. We've got started a book club already. We could do a book club, couldn't we? Is anyone else actually in a book club? Too busy?
No, I'm in two.
Oh, let's talk about that, Rebecca. How could we start a little Cello Dreaming book club? Anywho, I'm so sorry that Ilse wasn't able to join us this evening. I don't have any communications from her, but I'm just thinking that perhaps she's just totally forgotten that it was obviously Queensland time compared to New South Wales. And we will definitely try and find another opportunity to have Ilse on the call. And that's my next question. Are there cellists that you really think could be of great value as VIP coaching call person? If so, send me your ideas of who we could bring on the call. Who would you like to pick brains of? And of course, we have a wonderful collection of teaching artists who come to the summer retreat. And the idea is to be able to use this platform as a way just to kind of connect with them and just see how they're going. If you don't already, please follow Ilse's socials. She's been doing some amazing touring through New South Wales. Is anyone following her tour at the moment? Yeah. And of course, the other thing that I wanted Ilse to talk about was the fact that it's just been St. Patrick's Day yesterday. Did anyone actually play a jig yesterday for St. Pat's? Anyone done any Irish music? You could also do a slow air. But Ilse runs a online cello club, and she also has some wonderful online lessons to do specifically with Irish music. And she also has sheet music for sale. So please do check out her resources. Hey, Kim, did you get any of that stuff in her merch? She's very good with merch. Did you get anything from her merch stand at the concert?
Yes, I did get her book of music, of the airs, and I can't remember what they're called. But yes, Kate and I had a little play through a few of them. Right. So that was quite fun. But we've been a bit busy. But yeah, that's our plan, is to.
Ta-da! There's Jean. Have you tried any of those yet, Jean? They'd be nice to kind of add other parts to. You just need to unmic if you're going to speak, though, Jean.
No, I haven't had time to try them.
Yeah.
I want to, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's so much great music there. And of course, we've got to remember that the traditional Irish tunes were not taught with music in front of you. It would have been taught traditionally by ear, by rote. Which is kind of what Ilse was doing in the class. What was the kind of takeaway for Jean and Kim, who were at the retreat with Ilse's folk class? How did you find that experience, just sitting, receiving, creating, improvising more without sheets in front of you? Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Jean and Kim, to close?
I enjoyed it, but it was hard to remember because my brain doesn't want to remember the bit. So, yeah, that was where I struggled.
Okay.
So music, I need music in front of me to help.
It gives you that safety.
Yeah. Yes.
We have some really good hints on just playing the basic root chords using very simple fingerings that I hadn't thought of. And it's quite incredible that you can just, basically bar across and play, root chords in any key very easily. That was quite amazing. Because you don't often think about playing chords on the cello. So, that was fantastic.
Great. Absolutely. And thank you so much, everyone. That was a really power-punched, quick pivot for me, talking about Bach and early music and trying to connect it to folk music. But it's wonderful to see you. Hey, Leonie, we'd encourage you at any point to come to Queensland and join our community. But I'm hoping to come down to Tassie soon, just so you know. I haven't announced it yet, but I'm looking at October. I'm going to be down there for a festival. So I'm going to try and tag a workshop or a masterclass and just sow the idea of a retreat. So I'll hit you up, Leonie, and we'll kind of talk a little bit about what we can do. Is October a nice time for Tasmania?
It should be a good time.
Great. So we should hang before then, and we'll try and organise something for some cello people down there. Yeah?
Cool.
That'd be wonderful.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Now, did anyone have a very specific question? Otherwise, I've kind of curveballed my own Q&A with talking lots about Bach and how exciting it is, and Baroque cellos and Baroque bows.
Is there anything specific we can do for fingertip care?
But actually, maybe Kim might know more. I often just use, you see, we've probably got the different equivalent here, which is humidity. And so I actually find I need to dry out my fingertips here. Otherwise, I get blisters. So if I'm working in a humid environment, I will actually use tea tree oil a lot just to kind of dry out the skin. But I personally have never had that problem. Has anyone else had calluses disappear? It just means you're practicing.
Only if you've got your hands really wet for a long time, or, you know, but otherwise, no. But yeah, Alco wipes is the medical thing. But
yeah.
And just drying out.
Cool. Kim, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't there kind of like plastic, you can kind, it's a bit like nail varnish, and you can actually like coat your fingertips? I've seen it before. It's like plastic skin.
That could wreck your strings.
Well, not necessarily, because it's actually it's designed for you know, when you actually had injuries. It's designed to kind of coat the skin a little bit. So
like a silicone dress, like a silicone dressing.
Yeah, a bit like that.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Everyone I've spoken to said, oh, if that happens, you've just got to start from scratch, and it's very painful.
It is. I've only ever chopped mine off with knife skills, but generally speaking, they're there. Well, that's the problem when you get a callus, you can't feel it as much, can you? Anyway, there we go. What a nice story to finish on. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining me.
Thank you.
I'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Well, I'll see you everybody in Brisbane on Saturday. Remember, it's this Saturday, Brisbane people. See you then. See you,
Thank you.
Leonie.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in.
See you.